we finished the yes, we started the Mishnah at 55b. Let me go over what we learned yesterday outside. So yesterday we had learned the final little piece of on 55a, which was dealing with Rav Acha's brisa. How do you answer Rav Acha's brisa? Okay, that I guess we reviewed already, because we said the two understandings that the word they learned from the pasuk, that the brisa learns from a pasuk, from a verse. It says Yisku. Let me mute everyone here. 1 second. Mute all. Okay. So the brisa had learned from a pasuk that you're hakoil lefi musafin hamusafin toikin. Everything according to the musafs, that's how you blow, which Rav Acha thought meant to mean that as many musafs as there are, that's how many blows you need to do. You need to do 9 blows for each musaf. So if there's a few musafs, you do a few 9 blows, which could be up to like 27 blows for Rosh Hashanah, let's say. Rosh Hashanah is Rosh Chodesh and it's Shabbos. So you would have like 27 blows. That was Rav Acha's understanding. But the Gemara says that can't be. So the Gemara's conclusion was that there's 2 other options. One is that according to the amount of musafs, that's how long you make the blast, or that's how many people you include as trumpeters. How many trumpeters did they have? And that had more musafs, you included more trumpeters. And then the final little piece of the Gemara was, we that do 2 days of Yom Tov, how do we mention the sacrifices in the musaf? And I mentioned to you that it becomes a little confusing because there's a difference how you daven when you're in Israel or when you're outside of Israel. And I mentioned that it even gets harder because some Siddurim, like the Lubavitch Siddur, it only has the version of what you do when you're outside of Israel. So when you're in Israel and you have that Lubavitch Siddur, it doesn't really say the exact, the proper paragraph that's added in the davening. So in other words, you're in Israel and you're in the middle of your Shemona Esrei, and you actually have to switch. You have to leave out a certain paragraph that it says there. And I'm sure the new Siddurim probably have added what to do if you live in Israel. But I just looked this morning at the Art Scroll Siddur, and at least the old version that I have, it also does not mention what to do in Israel. It seems to mention only what you do outside of Israel. Surprisingly, I thought they would probably cover themselves, but it seems like common, I guess once the Siddur has English, they assume it's for outside of Israel, So turns out that it is a little confusing, no matter what Siddur you're using. Maybe the new Siddur, I'm sure ArtScroll probably has updated their Siddurim many times. I have an old version of their Siddur. But in any event, Rashi lets us know that there's 2 issues that really we're dealing with. The Gemara is dealing with one issue, but it leads to the other issue of reading the Torah. So the Gemara, according to Rashi at least, the Gemara is specifically talking about the Musaf added paragraphs about the sacrifices. And it really is a big topic, I must say. This is not a small discussion. Tosfos over here has a whole little discussion about this as well. And maybe we should actually mention a few of Tosfos's points. So let's discuss this actually a little more in depth. What we're dealing with here is, when you recite the Musaf Shemona Esrei, why are we saying that prayer? We're saying it as a means of commemorating the sacrifice that was brought in the temple. In the Beis Hamikdash, they brought a Musaf sacrifice, or number of sacrifices, and for the Musaf, the Musaf literally means additional sacrifices. And so we daven the Musaf as a commemoration of those sacrifices. And that's why in the Musaf, you'll see that there's a emphasis of what sacrifices were brought on that holiday. Rosh Chodesh, we have a Musaf for Rosh Chodesh, and it mentions the sacrifices that were brought on that Musaf. And then on the holidays, you have a Musaf. On Shabbos, you have Musafs. And each of these Musafs in the Shmona Esrei, in the Amidah, you have added the emphasis on what were the sacrifices that were brought, and we wish we have the Beis Hamikdash and we could bring those sacrifices. And so we read those sacrifices and we ask Hashem. It should be as if we are bringing those sacrifices, as the pasuk says, "Unashalma farim svasemai," that our lips should be completed as if it was the actual animals. It should be calculated, imagined as if we are bringing the sacrifices. Parim should be like we're bringing these bulls. Now, so that's the musaf. So the thing is that the Gemara is bothered with, outside of Israel, we don't know what exact day of the holiday it is. Now, on a regular holiday, it's not a big deal. Let's say Pesach. So the first day of Pesach and the second day of Pesach basically is, or Shavuos. The first day, let's pick Shavuos. The first day of Shavuos, the second day of Shavuos is basically the same sacrifices. Or let's say Chol HaMoed Pesach. The first day of Chol HaMoed, the second day of Chol HaMoed, the third day of Chol HaMoed, all of those days are equal. The sacrifice is the same. So it doesn't really make a difference. Your Musaf, I'm doing Musaf on Chol HaMoed, on the intermediate days of the holiday of Pesach. Okay, I said the paragraph for the intermediate days of the Pesach. And that paragraph is actually going to be the same exact paragraph as day one of Chol HaMoed intermediate days, of day two intermediate days, of day three intermediate, of day four intermediate days, always the same paragraph. So it's not much of a question of an issue. However, we've just concluded, or we are aware that the musafs of the different days of Sukkot are different musafs, meaning that you're going to have the first day of Chol HaMoed, the first day of Sukkot is, of course, 13 bulls. The second day of Sukkot is 12 bulls. The third day of Sukkot, 11 bulls. Each day it gets less and less. That means that the sacrifices on each of the days is going to be a different sacrifice. That means each musaf of each day of Sukkot, you got to do a different one. Okay. So if we're going to be doing a different one, how do you deal with the different sacrifices on outside of Israel, where we have 2 days and we're not sure which day is which? So which one do you mention? Do you mention the questionable one? Do you mention the official one? In other words, for example, the first day of the intermediate days of Sukkot outside of Israel. What number day of Sukkot is that? So, well, you had the first day of Sukkot. You had the second day of Sukkot, which is a holiday outside of Israel. And then you have the first intermediate day. So it's really the third day of Sukkot. But because we're outside of Israel, it could be considered the second day of Sukkot, because we're always we're in question if we calculated the months correctly, or we might be a day off. In other words, Rosh Chodesh maybe was not, maybe the previous month could be 29 days, it could be 30 days. So we might have calculated it 29 days, but maybe it should have been 30 days, and that would push us off a day. And if that, in other words, push us a day off, which would mean that the last month is 30 days, that means that Sukkot we started too early. We should have waited a day to start Sukkot. Or the third day of Sukkot is really the second day of Sukkot. And the seventh day of Sukkot is really the sixth day of Sukkot. Now, the reason the Gemara is bringing this here, really, it's not because we know that each day is less. The reason the Gemara is really bringing it here is because it is connected to the previous discussion about, it happens to have a connection, which the Gemara brings in. It brings in that connection that there could be a day that you're going to miss out in mentioning that day. And that was connected to the previous discussion that when Shabbos falls on one of the days of Sukkot, you miss out in something. So here also, you might end up missing out in something because depending on what day you're going to do, you might miss out a day. So that's the connection to this Gemara. That's why the Gemara is bringing it here, really. It's bringing it here because of a certain side point. But I'm discussing it because it actually has a practical application when it comes to davening Musaf, and it has a practical application when it comes to reading the Torah. And this is the source for all of those laws, is this Gemara right here. Our Gemara is the source of what happens in Shul. So now you go to Shul, of course, don't show off that you know this Gemara, but you will have a little edge over the other people there when you go to Eretz Yisrael with a whole group and they don't seem to know what's going on over there. And you explain to them, listen, in Israel is a different version than outside. And the reason for that is because outside of Israel, we're not sure what day it is. But in Israel, we do know what day it is. And because of that, there's going to be a different version here. And that's why they're going to read the Torah a little differently, and they're going to say the Musaf a little differently here. And so even though your siddur might say one thing, this is actually the way you're supposed to do it. So that's the that's the practical application of this, is very practical. David, did you have a question, or Jeff? Or
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're saying that when a person says the davening for the korbanos, it's as if he brought the korban.
Right.
So
Hashem gives us reward or considers it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is, if a person, even though the wording is,
there's so much noise. I don't know where the noise is coming from. Let me just mute everyone else. Okay, continue.
If a person is saying the korbanos and he has in mind for the wrong day, but at the same time the wording is the same for all those days. So if he has in mind for the wrong day, is that a problem?
So your question is applicable on like Pesach. The intermediate days is all the same sacrifices, and he might have in mind he's bringing the sacrifice for the first intermediate day, and really it's the second intermediate day, and you're wondering, since it's the same sacrifice, is that okay? Or because he thought of it as the first day, really it's the second day, it's a problem. Is that what your question is?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not really sure it goes. We have to worry about such a thing. I think that's taking it a little too far. Halavai, the person will have in mind the sacrifice, like this is the sacrifice brought. You know what I mean? I don't know if we're so worried that he might think of that it's the second day and it's the first day. You know what I mean? I'm not sure that that's such an issue. In fact, we learned yesterday that it seems even if he makes a mistake in the sacrifice, but because he said it's as that the sacrifices were brought as it says in the Torah, that already makes him fulfill his obligation. So it would seem like the fact that you might have thought it's the second day or the third day, I don't think that that's an issue at all. Okay, so getting back to this discussion here, this big discussion here, and we were learning Rashi's pshat yesterday, Rashi's interpretation. There are two other major opinions of how to work the readings of the Torah. But so let's get right into this. So the way we explained and Rashi's understanding of it was that when we have 2 days, how do you do the 2 days of the Musaf? How do you deal with the fact that we have questionable days, which the third day might be the second day, the seventh day might be the sixth day. Every day that we're celebrating on Sukkot is really questionable if it's the day before. That's part of having a 2-day holiday, part of living outside of Israel. You always have this concept. It's called Sveika de Yoima. You're not sure if today is really today or if it's yesterday, and that's why we're always celebrating 2 days of Yom Tov, even though in Israel they only celebrate 1 day of Pesach in the beginning, one Seder, they have one Sukkot, one the actual holiday, 1 day of the holiday in the Sukkah. The rest of the days are intermediate days. Here in outside of Israel, we have 2 days, 2 Seders, two days of Shavuos, and it's called a Sveika de Yomer. We're not sure if it's really today the holiday or if it is if really today is really the day before and tomorrow is the holiday and today is really not the holiday and so on. So that's the fact of being outside of Israel. It's the Sveika de Yomer. And we celebrate both days as the holiday, and then the rest of the days of Sukkot continue with that question: if today is today really the 3rd day of Sukkot, or is it really the 2nd day? Is today the 4th day of Sukkot? Is it really the 3rd day? Every day of Sukkot we have that dilemma, and because of that, the Gemara says here. So what do you recite in the Shemona Esrei when you talk about the sacrifices? And again, the 2nd day sacrifice is different than the 3rd day sacrifice, and the 4th, each day was a different sacrifice. Really, there's one difference, and that is the bulls, the amount of bulls. Because the 1st day the bulls were 13, the 2nd day there were 12 bulls, the 3rd day were 11 bulls, and it went down until the final day of Sukkot. The 7th day was 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7.
7.
So it was seven bulls on the final day of Sukkot. And then Shmini Atzeres, which follows right after, is a whole different category, different rules of the different law. And that holiday, actually, you bring 1 bull, Parechod, Ayalechod. That was one bull. So that's the facts about the sacrifices. And then the question was, what do you say when you talk about the sacrifice in the Musaf Shemona Esrei? What do you recite? And the real question that the Gemara is having is on the real question that the Gemara is having would be when it's like the 3rd day of Sukkot, which is the 1st intermediate day outside of Israel. What would you say in the Musaf? Do you want to say day 2? Because we never did day 2 yet. We mentioned on day 1 and day 2, day 1, because it's a holiday, and the 2nd day of Sukkot outside of Israel, even though we know, or we would consider it day 2 of Sukkot, but we're celebrating it as a holiday, as if it's day 1, and it wouldn't be appropriate to recite in the Musaf of day 2 of Sukkot, day 2. We only say day 1 of Sukkot. It's a holiday. That's the appropriate thing. We want to honor the holiday, give it its full emphasis and glory, and we say the holiday sacrifice on day 2 of Sukkot. We're celebrating it as if it's the holiday, and we don't want to desecrate it or disgrace it or degrade it by reciting the sacrifice of day 2, and yet we're considering it a holiday. So we read the sacrifice of day 1 as we did the day before. So day 1 and day 2 outside of Israel, we're only reciting the day 1 sacrifice because it's the holiday. Both days are holiday days. We call them day 1s. Now comes day 3, and we want to know what to do. If we recite day 3, it's going to end up that day 2 we missed out on. We never said the sacrifices of day 2. Again, it's day 3 of Sukkot. It's the 1st intermediate day, but it's really day 3 of Sukkot. And if you want to go into the nitty gritty, it's considered a suffix, a doubt. Maybe it's day 2. It's officially day 3, but it might be day 2. And we want to know what to say in the Musaf. You might say, well, let's just do day 3 and skip out day 2. We never did day 2. Okay, well, too bad. We weren't able to, and we're going to leave it out. And that's called Sheni Yidacha. That's Abaye's opinion. That just leave out, push off day 2. We don't say it. We're not able to recite that in the prayers because you can't. On the 2nd day of Sukkot, you can't do it because it's a holiday. It wouldn't be right and honorable for the holiday. And on the 3rd day is the 3rd day. So just leave it out. Comes along Rava, and Rava says, no, You missed out in day 2. Do it. Day 2. On day 3, say day 2. And on day 4, do day 3. And just keep the right order. You've done day 1 and day 2 of Sukkot. You've said about day 1, the sacrifices. Day 3, say the sacrifices for day 2. And it's not totally wrong because this is called a suffix of day 2. And you never recited day 2. And therefore, Rava says that's what you should recite is the sacrifices of day 2. And comes along the Gemara. The Gemara says we have a brisa that seems to fit with that. And that is a very similar idea, although it's not the same. And that is that when it comes to Shabbos falls on one of the days of Sukkot, what do you do with the fact that you miss out in the song of the Musaf of that day of Sukkot? What do you do about that? You missed out in one of the songs. Should you continue and just leave that one out? Or should you, the day after Shabbos, do the one that you missed? And then the day after that day, the Monday afterwards, do the Sunday's song. So should you make up and care about the fact that you missed one and keep the order right? Or should you just leave out that one? And it comes in the law was, and we learned this brisa, and the brisa had said this was a few days ago. We mentioned, or we learned that yimoitu yidacha. What do? You leave out the final day. You lose out, so you never end up saying the final day of the song of the final day. And Rava seems to say a very similar thing, that when it comes to the sacrifices that we're reciting in our Musaf davening, what ends up happening is the first and second day you recite the sacrifices of day 1. The third day you recite the sacrifices of day 2. The fourth day you recite the sacrifices of day 3. The seventh day you recite the sacrifices of day 6. What about the sacrifices of day 7? Can't do it. We have to leave it out. There's no day. There's no more days of Sukkot. So we leave it out. So the final, we keep the order. The main thing is the order, according to Rava. You got to keep the order. You did day 1. Now you got to do day 2. What do you mean? It's already day 3? No, day 2. You got to do that. You missed out day 2. So do it now. And it is called the suffix day 2. So the same thing was with the songs. Rava says, let's do the same thing. It seems to be a very similar idea, that keep to the order, and then the final day you'll end up leaving out the final day sacrifices. Okay, we can't do it. Now that's what the Gemara mentions, that there seems to be a brisa like Rava, but then the Gemara says Meimar was Masakin. He established that no, you do both. The Madalge Deluge, jump backwards and do both. You missed out day 2, do day 2 and 3. And the understanding would be that on every day of Sukkot, you will say both. And again, this is only outside of Israel. In Israel, you know what day it is. On day 3, only recite the sacrifices of day 3. So in Israel, how many bulls do you mention in your Shemona Esrei on day 3 of Sukkot? You will mention 11 bulls. How many bulls do you mention in the diaspora Shemona Esrei? If you're not in Israel, how many bulls do you say on the 3rd day of Sukkot? You say 12 bulls, and you say 11 bulls. You say for the 2nd day, you do 12 bulls, and you say for the 3rd day, you do 11 bulls. So outside of Israel is going to be a different Shemona Esrei. There's a different additional paragraph that you say than you do in Israel. Yes, Jeffrey.
And it's even more complicated when it comes to the day of Shabbos, because you also want to recite the Shabbos sacrifice as well. And so we do that also. And we have an extra pasuk or whatever we put in too. So we do the additive solution with other things.
Yeah, but when it's Shabbos, it's the same Israel and outside of Israel.
Yes.
So that at least makes it easier. You see it in the Siddur.
But Shabbos, it's very hard. No Siddur yet made it so clear. So
interesting.
Very easy for you to miss that, because it's one thing you say first, right? We say the Shabbos sacrifice first, and then
the paragraph for Shabbos.
there's a little extra verse for
Paragraph there,
Shabbos,
right?
right?
Right,
And it
right.
comes afterwards, right? So, yeah.
I think it's before.
Okay.
I think it's before. I don't have a siddur in front of me. Do I have a siddur here? I might have a siddur in my phone that might have the musaf of. I don't know if it has the musaf of the holidays here. Let's see. No, it only has musaf of Reish Chodesh. No, I don't have a siddur in front of me.
Well, I'll look it up.
But I I believe it's V'yom HaShabbos first, and then
Yes.
and then you say the other sacrifices. Yeah. Okay. In any event, yeah, that's a good point. That's that's also an area where people forget that they forget the Shabbos inclusion there. Okay. In any event, this is the conclusion of the Gemara. So we've just concluded the Gemara, and this is the way Rashi learns, and we've just clarified the difference between Israel and outside of Israel. And now let's jump to the Kriyas HaTorah, the reading of the Torah. Now, when it comes to a holiday, how do you read the Torah? You have a holiday has 4 aliyahs. Any day that has musaf, it's not Yom Tov, it's Chol Hamoed. So any day that has musaf, you have 4 aliyahs, Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed. Those days have 4 people get called up to the Torah. Now, on a regular weekday Torah reading, like a Monday and a Thursday, 3 people get called up to the Torah. So there's an additional person called up because this is a day with a musaf. We're doing an extra day. And Rashi understands that extra aliyah is the one that's unique for the holiday. And that's the one that should emphasize what day today is. And Rashi says, you know what? The first 3 aliyahs, you read whatever portion you read. You read the second day, the third day, the fourth day, the fifth, whatever reads. You read some of the portions. The last aliyah, you got to put in what you call this day, what sacrifices are meant for this day. So, what would you do in Israel for the 4th aliyah? For the final aliyah of the Torah reading, the final section of the Torah reading. In Israel, what you would recite is on the 3rd day of Sukkot, which is in Israel, maybe it's the 2nd day of Chol Hamoed, but it's the 3rd day of Sukkot. In Israel, you would say for the 3rd day sacrifices, how many bulls? 11 bulls. What would you read in the Torah reading for the final aliyah, the 4th aliyah, outside of Israel? You would actually read 2 paragraphs. You would read the paragraph for the 2nd day of Sukkot and for the 3rd day of Sukkot. That's what this is called, the Medalge Daluge. And how many bulls? The 2nd day, you'd read that there's 12 bulls. And on the 3rd day paragraph, you'd include there that there's 11 bulls. And so it would be a different Torah reading for the final aliyah. Now, Tosfos is bothered with this understanding of Rashi. I should also mention before I get to Tosfos that there's one more point Rashi makes, and that is that his teachers said that the proper way to do the first 3 aliyahs is that you do on the 3rd day of Sukkot, outside of Israel, you would do day 2 for aliyah number 1. You would do, again, day 2 for aliyah number 1. Day 3 for aliyah number 2, which is today. Today is day 3. It's a suffix. It's a doubt that it might be day 2. So you did day 2, you did day 3. And then the 3rd aliyah, you're going to do day 4 for tomorrow's aliyah. And then the final man being called up to the Torah, he reads the official holiday that today is, and that's day 2 and 3. That's outside of Israel. So the way the rabbis of Rashi explained it is don't just read anything for the first 3 aliyahs. Read day 2, 3, and 4. Now, Tosfos is bothered with, think about that. What are you going to do on day 7? On day 7, what are you going to read? What do you think? 6, 7, 8, right? Day 7 is a doubt, might be 6. It is day 7. And there's a Biyam Hashmini, there's day 8. Tais says that you for sure can't do because this is not day 8, is called Shmini Atzeres. It's a different holiday. So you can't do day 6, 7, 8. So if you want to follow the same symmetrical, the same order that you've been doing, you're going to get stuck with Shoshana Rabbah. What are you reading? You can't do 6, 7, and 8. He says, oh, okay. So how about do 5, 6, and 7? Well, yesterday I did 5, 6. Again, we're talking about the first 3 aliyahs. The final aliyah, we don't have a problem with day 7. Why? Because day 3, you did 3 and 2 for the 2 and 3, I should say, for the final aliyah. Day 5, you did 4 and 5 for the final aliyah. And day 7, you do 6 and 7. That's fine. But what about the first 3? The first 3 aliyahs, it's very nice that you have this rhythm of you do the day before because it's a suffix that day. It's a doubt that it might be the day before. It is this day, so you do this day, and then you do tomorrow's day. That's very nice. That rhythm fits until you get to day 7, and now you're stuck because you can't do day 8. So you can't do 6, 7, and 8. So what are you going to do? So do 5, 6, and 7. Okay, let's do 5, 6, and 7, which actually would be the same as the day before, the first 3 aliyahs. Because what did you do day 6? You did 5, 6, and 7. And then on day 6, the final aliyah was 5 and 6. Now on day 7, what are you going to do? 5, 6, 7 also. The first 3 aliyahs exactly the same as the day before, 5, 6, 7. But the final aliyah is not going to be 5 and 6 like you did yesterday. It's going to be 6 and 7 for Hoshana Rabbah. But Taisu says, but still, that's not symmetrical. It's not, you're not doing exactly the same. I don't know if that's the correct word, symmetrical. It's not the same rhythm that you've been doing. You're switching now for the 7th day. And that sounds a little surprising. You're not following the same exact style, because each day what should have been the same type of order. And here, the 7th day, you're stuck. So that's one question Taisus has. The next question Taisus has, very interesting question he asks. He says, what happens on Hanukkah? And this is the Torah portion that you read in Parshas Nasai. It also has the numbers day 1, day 2, day 3. It talks about the each of the days. And on Hanukkah we talk about do the reading of the Chanukas Hamizbeach or Chanukas Mishkan. It's the dedication, the inauguration of the Mishkan, which was done after the Shiva Simei Hamalum, after the 7 days of prepping for the Mishkan, and then they had the Yom Hashmini, the 8th day, which was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and that was when there was a very special revelation on the 8th day, on Parsha Shmini, and the great revelation then, Berchos Koyanim, and so on. And you had all of the great stuff. And that day, it says that the leaders of the tribes started bringing their sacrifices. That Hashem said each one should bring for each day. So you had the next 12 days of holidays. Each day was a holiday. Ruvain, you had actually didn't start with I forget the order. I think Yehuda was first. Yisachar, Yehuda. I think Yehuda was first, and then Yisachar, right? Yehuda was first. I should pull it up. Parshas Nosoi.
You're correct.
Yeah, Yehuda's first. Yeah. Okay. So it's good to have a Balkairi over here helping me out. So we have you have the each day was a separate.
And then you brought it back home.
Each day was a separate holiday for in sacrifices for that nasi, that leader, and that tribe. Now, the reading of the Torah on Hanukkah is done similar to the reading of the Torah, similar to the story of the inauguration of the tabernacle. Why? Because the holiday of Hanukkah, we got back the Beis Hamikdash and we inaugurated the altar, and we're able to. So we read that those same readings. So day 1, day 2, day 3. The question is, how do you divide up the readings of Hanukkah? And the readings of Hanukkah, Tosfos, the way Tosfos says, if you look at the readings of Hanukkah, what do we do on Hanukkah? So he says that, let me read it to you inside. When you read Parshas Nesiim, the first 2 aliyahs read the Nasi of that day, and the third aliyah reads the next day. In other words, you divide up the portion. I think it's 6 psukim each of those days of the Nesiim, and you could divide it up into 2. You can't divide it up into 3. And there's 3 aliyahs on each day of Hanukkah. Hanukkah doesn't have Musaf, so you have 3 aliyahs on every day of Hanukkah. And what do you read during those days? You read the aliyahs of what was brought on when they did the Chanukas Hamishkan. You read that portion that's in Parshas Nasai. And how do you do it? So let's say the second day of Hanukkah, you'd read day 2 of the Nesiims bringing the korban, and then that would be the first 2 aliyahs, because you could divide that portion, that paragraph, into 2 people being called up to the Torah. Each person gets 3 verses minimum. And then the third aliyah on Hanukkah, what happens? He gets the next days, because we need to give him we need a third person to get an aliyah. You call up 3 people, but you can only divide the portion into 2. So you read the next paragraph. So then the third guy gets the third oila, the third person who gets called up gets the next paragraph. So Tosfos says, what do you see from there? You see that the most important aliyah is the first, not the final. So how is Rashi learning that the extra, the final aliyah is really the one that deserves to be honored with this day's Torah portion? And so he says, you don't see that with Hanukkah. On Hanukkah, what do? You have the first person is getting this week's Torah portion. So he says it doesn't seem to fit with the with that rule, with that style. So Tosfos therefore argues, and he says, you know what you're supposed to do on Sukkot? On Sukkot, the way it should be done is you have 4 aliyahs, and the way you should read it is that the first person gets, let's say it's the 3rd day of Sukkot. Pick the 3rd day of Sukkot. The first oila, we got 4 people who were called up to the Torah. The first one read day 2, the second one day 3, the third one read again day 2, and the fourth one read again day 3. And he says that would be the proper way to do it. And basically, he's seeing that the first day, and maybe include in the second day, the first aliyah and the second aliyah are the more important aliyahs, and therefore they should have the this day's reading, and he says on the 7th day you're not going to have a problem now. In other words, his answer really answers up the 7th day, because what happens on the 7th day now, you don't have to deal with the 8th day at all. It's always about yesterday and today. That's all you're dealing with. Now, the final question of Tosfos, the question about Hanukkah, is definitely an interesting question that Tosfos is asking, because how is he really answering it? Tosfos says the Rishon is Iker, and he's emphasizing that the first one is the most important one, but yet what is Tosfos advising to do for the first one? He's advising to do day 2. What did Rashi say? Day 2. Rashi also said day 2. And what did Rashi say for the second aliyah? Day 3. What is Tosfos saying for the second aliyah? Day 3. So Rashi only emphasized that the final aliyah is the most important, where you're going to bring out the you're going to bring out the holiday of the day in the final aliyah. Tosfos argued, I guess you would say in theory, that that the final aliyah, that Rashi held that the final aliyah is the most important aliyah, and Tosfos says no, it's really the first, the second, but it doesn't really seem to be a difference in practical in a practical sense, at least the way I see it. Again, I I didn't look up the commentaries on Tosfos, but the second question of Tosfos doesn't seem to really. It sounds like he's only arguing more in theory. In other words, I'd have to think about if there's a practical difference according to the way Tosfos is asking the question, like what ends up practically a difference if you see it that way or if you see it this way. Either way, the fact is the first two aliyahs you're giving day 2 and day 3. Right, and then Shvi on Hoshana Rabbah. What are you doing? No, actually, no. You know what? There is a difference. Now I just realized what it is. I just realized. According to Rashi, what are you going to do on Hoshana Rabbah? According to Rashi, the first aliyah is day 5, the second aliyah is day 6, and the third aliyah is day 7. This is it. 5, 6, 7, and the final aliyah of on Hoshana Rabbah is 6 and 7. So you have 5, 6, 7, 6, 7. Those are the 4 aliyahs. 5, 6, 7, 6, 7. According to Tosfos, that's not good because 5 and 6, that doesn't belong as the first 2 aliyahs. 5 and 6. You got to do 6 and 7 as the first 2 aliyahs because this is the holiday. Those are the main aliyahs. That's the issue. In other words, it's not going to affect the third day of Sukkot or the 4th day or the 5th day, but the 7th day is where it's gonna kick in this problem. It's on Hoshana Rabbah where the problem's gonna kick in. That's the problem. So now Tosfos answers that problem by saying that no, on Hoshana Rabbah you do the most important 2 aliyahs, the first 2 aliyahs, 6 and 7 on Hoshana Rabbah. And that's those are the aliyahs similar to Hanukkah that you have. Hanukkah, the first 2 aliyahs are that day's nasi, that day's celebration of the inauguration, and on Sukkot it would be the same too. So that's the understanding of the of Tosfos. Now, it comes out a big difference in halacha. I would like to get the Shulchan Aruch actually. Let me just get a Shulchan Aruch. I'll be 30 seconds.
Meantime, we should all talk about what we should pick for the next reading. Do we make a compromise?
I liked Rosh Hashanah because, as I said, you can practically figure we're going to have a Siyum right before Rosh Hashanah. It's 35 blot. It's about a month and a half until Rosh Hashanah. We can try to jiggle it so that we make it. It's not hard Gemara. And that would be nice.
So I picked that as my second choice. Yes. Anybody else have opinion?
Sorry about that. Should have had the Shulchan Aruch with me.
We were cheating and using the time to talk a little bit more about what we should study next.
Oh, okay. That's not called cheating. That's okay.
It's on the topic.
Okay. So we mentioned now Rashi and Tosfos's opinion. Before we do Shulchan Aruch, I should mention the Rif and the Rush. They also have an opinion here, and their opinion is that on the Chol HaMoed of Sukkot, what you would do for the first two aliyahs, everyone seems to agree it's day 2 and day 3. The third aliyah, according to Rashi, was you do the next day. According to Tosfos, go back and do day
2 and 3.
Go back and do day 2. Again, we're on the third day of Chol Hamoed. On the first 2 days, the first two aliyahs on the third day of Sukkot, first day of Chol Hamoed. It's the third day of Sukkot. The first two aliyahs is 2 and 3. Everyone agreed. Comes along the third day of Sukkot. Rashi says, do the next day's aliyah, do 4. Comes along, Tosfos says, no, go back and do day 2 for the third aliyah. Comes along the Rif in the Rush and say, do again day 3. So we got all different opinions here for the third aliyah. Now comes the fourth aliyah. And for the fourth aliyah, the Rif and the Rush agree with Rashi that it's day 2 and day 3. Now, according to the Rif and the Rush, let's think about Hoshana Rabbah, what's going to happen. On Hoshana Rabbah, you would do
6 and 7.
day 6 and day 7. Tosfos's question, oy vey, what are you going to do for the next aliyah? Day 8? Chas v'shalom, you can't do day 8. That's a different holiday. So according to what's going to happen according to the Rif and the Rush is no problem. I'm going to do again day 7, and then for the final aliyah I have I do 6 and 7. So we've just figured out 2 ways we have to answer Tosfos's problem. We have Tosfos's option of going over what you did, or we have the Rif and the Rush's option of you repeat the second aliyah when you do the third aliyah. The third person who gets called up, he repeats that aliyah, and that would be another way to answer the problem of Tosfos's issue. Okay, so now we come